Be found, and multiple witnesses dying in sequence before their statements could be examined. These are not loose rumors, they are documented contradictions that fracture the foundation of the case. If this is the real starting point, what was removed before investigators ever arrived? consequential anomaly in the early case data involves the presence of Andy Bernard on Ben Hill Road during the critical window of Summer Wells' disappearance. The detail is not ambiguous. A neighbor's surveillance camera recorded Andy's vehicle and movement in the area at a time when law enforcement was attempting to reconstruct who was present on the road, who was leaving, and who had proximity to the Wells property. Despite the existence of visual confirmation, Andy initially told police he had not been on Ben Hill Road at all. A direct contradiction between a physical piece of evidence and a verbal denial establishes the foundation for a high-value investigative discrepancy. When a subject lies about physical presence, the core question becomes the motive behind avoiding that admission. Fred Hill, a local resident who interacted with multiple officers within the first 72 hours, added another layer to this discrepancy. According to Fred, Andy was not merely present, but was observed leaving the hollow alongside a blue pickup truck. The detail is consistent across multiple recounts by Fred and appears in context separate from public speculation. A dual vehicle departure, especially during the time frame when search operations were just beginning, introduces the possibility of coordinated movement between two individuals or two vehicles. The existence of a second vehicle also aligns with the broader pattern of early case clues pointing to road-based transport, including the K9 trail terminating abruptly at the street. The most serious statement associated with Andy does not come from Fred, but from Jody Sue's daughter, who reported that Andy told her he had seen Summer's dead body. When questioned later, Andy allegedly reframed the statement as dream. The shift from a declarative assertion of direct visual knowledge to a symbolic, non-literal dream suggests an attempt to retract an incriminating implication without fully denying the original phrasing. In forensic linguistics, a retreat from a direct statement into a metaphor is frequently categorized as post-exposure minimization, especially when the earlier phrasing was not elicited under pressure, but arose in casual conversation. Within 2 to 3 days after Summer was reported missing, Andy quit his job and left the area. Abrupt employment termination and geographic displacement, shortly after a critical incident, are patterns commonly flagged as avoidance behavior. The timing is material. Most residents remained engaged with search efforts, media presence, or community discussions. A rapid withdrawal from routine life, particularly without a documented external cause, raises questions regarding whether the change in behavior is linked to knowledge of the incident, fear of exposure, or an attempt to sever ties with individuals who could place him at the scene. Hunter's interview with Chris McDonough introduced another data point, the alleged "it's done" text message sent to Candace on the day of the disappearance. While the content is unverified, and the sender cannot be confirmed without digital forensic access, the timing overlaps with the same cluster of individuals. If the message originated from someone connected to Andy, or the environment Andy was interacting with that day, it would form a communication anomaly inside the same temporal boundary as the camera footage, the blue pickup sighting, and the alleged statement about seeing Summer. The surrounding cluster of individuals linked to Andy via the hollow also exhibits significant instability after the disappearance. Multiple figures: Doug Gott, John Smith, Roy Cotton died in the months following the event. Although cause of death for each individual is not established as suspicious, the statistical rarity of multiple associated individuals dying before they can be re-interviewed, especially in a rural region with a small population, is a notable pattern. Roy Cotton's final remarks add another weight-bearing detail. He allegedly said, "When they find Summer, they will know who did it." The phrasing reflects perceived insider knowledge rather than generalized community speculation. If Cotton possessed relevant information, and if his death occurred before a comprehensive interview, then potential testimony or corroborating details may have been permanently lost. These interconnected elements create material investigative gaps requiring systematic examination. First, the question of why Andy denied being on Ben Hill Road despite camera evidence remains unresolved. A false denial typically signals either fear of implication, involvement in unrelated illicit activity, or an attempt to prevent investigators from exploring associations that existed during the time period. Without an alternative explanation, The denial functions as an intentional attempt to obscure presence. Second, the role of the blue pickup truck following Andy is unexplained. If the second vehicle was associated with him, it introduces a two-vehicle system capable of executing a short-range transfer. If it was independent, then a coincidence of tightly timed movement still requires evaluation. In both scenarios, the blue pickup becomes a variable with potential relevance to movement, concealment, or handoff. Third, the presence of George Bernard, Andy's father, on Ben Hill Road on June 15 despite not residing in the area for approximately 20 years introduces an additional anomaly. The timing appearing on the day of the disappearance and his reported behavior, asking what people knew, suggest situational awareness inconsistent with a long-absent resident. His proximity reinforces the possibility that multiple members of the same family or network had overlapping situational knowledge not represented in the official timeline. Fourth, Andy's departure from Tennessee within days of the disappearance fits the behavioral template for information avoidant withdrawal, particularly when paired with a known false statement to law enforcement. Geographic distancing immediately after being placed at the scene by visual evidence has investigative value, even if not proof of direct involvement. When these points are evaluated together, they form a cohesive cluster rather than isolated anomalies. Each data point may be insufficient alone, but combined, they establish a pattern of presence, evasion, contradictory statements, synchronized movement, and destabilized witness availability. The cluster directly intersects with the possibility of a handoff event, a witness transfer, or a localized disposal operation involving multiple actors. Given the density of contradictions, evasive behaviors, and corroborated presence, this cluster must be classified as suspect class A within an analytical framework. It holds the highest concentration of unresolved leads, unaligned statements, and behavioral red flags derived from the 10-file dataset. Do the overlapping movements and statements of Andy Bernard and his associated network represent coincidence, or the outline of an unacknowledged transfer event?
Time to go! Come on!
The behavioral and linguistic anomalies associated with Don Wells form one of the densest contradiction clusters in the entire Summer Wells case file. Across interviews, live streams, and statements collected over several years, Don repeatedly produces language that suggests prior knowledge, fixed certainty, or internalized conclusions about Summer's fate that are not supported by verified evidence. These statements, collectively categorized as slippage, carry investigative value because they reveal unconscious framing rather than deliberate public messaging. Slippage, in forensic linguistics and behavioral analysis, typically emerges when a speaker attempts to manage perception while simultaneously suppressing information that conflicts with the public narrative. In Don's case, this conflict manifests through absolute statements, misplaced certainty, scenario-specific references, and contradictory reconstructions of the day Summer disappeared. One of the most frequently cited statements is Don's declaration that she will never be found. This is not merely pessimism, it is categorical finality. Innocent parents of missing children often express difficulty, despair, or fear, but rarely produce language that frames the child's status as definitively unrecoverable. The phrase eliminates every investigative pathway: rescue, abduction, return, accidental discovery, or future evidence recovery. The certainty embedded in this statement creates a linguistic anomaly. Absolute predictions imply either knowledge or belief that the outcome is fixed and unchangeable. Without physical evidence supporting such a conclusion, the statement becomes inherently suspect. A second slippage appears in, "I'll see her in the resurrection." This is not a metaphorical coping sentence. It is a direct theological framing that presupposes Summer's death. Don does not speak conditionally. If she's gone, if something happened. He speaks with doctrinal finality, the implication that Summer is deceased at a time when law enforcement was still searching suggests again a cognitive shift away from uncertainty and toward internal acceptance of a specific outcome. It also contradicts the innocence model of parental reaction, which typically centers on active searching, public appeals, or conditional hope. Instead, Dawn consistently moves into post-mortem framing. The psychological discrepancy between uncertainty and acceptance provides investigative weight. Why is Dawn so certain of death when neither body nor cause has been confirmed? Another notable slippage involves Dawn's earlier belief that Summer might get run over. This predictive fear is highly specific. Parents often worry about generic risk: strangers, wildlife, accidents, but Dawn names a precise mechanism of harm. The relevance becomes more significant when combined with Candace's drunken statement captured in another file. I regret letting Summer play near that truck. When two independent individuals within the same household produce statements associated with vehicle-related harm, investigative attention shifts toward examining the physical environment, vehicles present on the property, and the plausibility of an accidental death scenario followed by concealment. The pairing of these